Well, good afternoon. I'm going to talk about some projects that I've worked on with respect to gathering government financial data and analyzing it. I'll also talk about some other types of non-financial data. If I could just start by getting a show of hands. Who here is not really interested in financial data and would rather learn about crime data and other kinds of data? Okay, so I'll give a good mix. It's mostly finance, but I'll definitely do the non-financial stuff as well. So, well, to start with the background, there are 91,000 local governments in the United States approximately. I guess the question is, like, how do we even know that number? How do I know that it's not 60,000 or 100,000 or 500,000? Well, every 5 years, the census conducts a census of state and local governments. They could create a complete enumeration of all the local governments in the U.S. And they have fairly rigorous definitions for what a government is, although different observers will make different conclusions. So for example, in California, the census says that there are 4,000 special districts. A special district is something other than a city, county, or school district. So the census lists about 4,000 of them, but the state controller's office lists 6,000. So the 91,000 is per the US Census, but your results may vary depending on how you define government or not. Of those 91,000, 20,000 approximately issue an audited financial report every year. And again, for those of you who are less interested in finance, these are still useful documents to you because the footnotes often contain a lot of interesting information about how the government works and what kinds of problems it might be having. Now, these financial statements are governed typically by standards set up by the Government Accounting Standards Board, but there's no comprehensive national repository of these documents, and they're almost always in PDF format. So it's really difficult to work with all this data, and I'll talk about the challenges of both getting the data and analyzing it. So, why is this important? Why did I, leave my job in the financial industry to work on this? So, we have an enormous amount of resources in this country being devoted to analyzing stocks, right? So you can go to 20 different websites and see the financial statistics of any publicly traded company for free. You can't really do that with governments, which are frankly much more systematically important. And there's a lot of interest in our society that collect this information, but then make it proprietary and sell it to institutional investors for a lot of money. So I think we really need to be democratizing this area, and just like small individual investors can see how a company is doing, I think citizens and service beneficiaries and others should be able to see how their governments are doing financially, how that compares. Another advantage of having this kind of information is that it can make the municipal bond market more efficient, and that's a sort of finance speak word for lower interest rates. So right now there's a lot of ignorance about the risk of municipal bonds, and as a result, interest rates are higher than they might be otherwise. So people watch the news and they hear, oh, Detroit went bankrupt, or in 2012, San Bernardino and Stockton went bankrupt. That must mean that municipal bonds are real dangerous, so I better avoid investing in municipal bonds. Well, that's the kind of problem you have when you don't apply data science techniques to working with data, because first of all, we know that only a few cities went bankrupt. The vast majority of cities didn't, so we just have a casual observation. And then we can actually see the properties or the statistics that really separate those that are prone to go bankrupt from those that really don't have any risk. So right now, with the lack of available data sets and the lack of available analytics, people really can't make those determinations. So the assumption then is just sort of play it safe and avoid all of these kinds of bonds. And then also, if we can find what statistics are associated with an ultimate financial crisis in the city, we can provide an early warning signal. So we can say, well, this city XYZ is starting to deteriorate. Maybe, the state should get involved, or the citizens in the jurisdiction should get involved and help that city, become more financially stable. So the ironic thing is I've done a lot of research on Depression-era municipal bond defaults, and the reason that I did that was up until recently, there were not a statistically significant number of municipal bond defaults and bankruptcies in the United States recently. So I wanted to go back to the Depression era. And when I did that, I stumbled across the fact that the Census Bureau at that time produced exhaustive financial statistics for the 311 largest cities in the United States. And this is copied off of I think it's about a 100-page document that just has table after table after table of statistics. Now, this wasn't free. It had a cover price of, I think, $1, which is, you could imagine, was a lot during the Depression. But you could go to the library and see this. So in a way, the free access to municipal financial statistics was actually much better in 1931 than it is now in 2015. And I'm hoping to fix that, and if there are other people in this room who find that to be a compelling vision, I hope you'll look me up on LinkedIn or buttonhole me after the talk. So let's talk about some of the operational issues here with collecting this type of data and related data sets. So the first step is, where are all of these documents? Well, over the last few years, it's become common for governments to post these kinds of documents, their budgets, their audited financial statements and other things, other related financial and non-financial disclosures on their website. So if you could put together a list of all the websites, you could actually crawl them on a periodic basis and see whether new documents have come up. But many governments don't publish their data there. Ironically, the federal government makes any city or county or university or other nonprofit organization that receives more than $500,000 of federal funds, they're required to submit their audited financial statements to the federal government, but the federal government doesn't publish them. Fortunately, that's going to change in late 2016, but right now that's still not available. You can go to the Census's website, which unfortunately is down until December 31st because it was hacked by Anonymous back in July, but starting hopefully January 1st of 2016, you can go there to see which governments have filed these reports and look at the tear sheets that provide lists of the federal grants that each filer has obtained. The best site in recent years for getting this kind of information has been the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, EMMA site, and unfortunately I don't have enough brain cells to remember what EMMA stands for. It stands for something about electronic municipal market something, but it's basically a website that has all the information that you'd ever want to know about municipal bonds. Unfortunately, the data is not really that well organized, at least if you're not a municipal bond market maven, and everything is listed by what are called QSIP numbers, which is a proprietary identifier used in the municipal bond market. So a lot of non-financial researchers find it very difficult to work with. When I've done these projects before, and I did one for the State of California Treasurer's Office, I did one last year for Pew Charitable Trust. Often you just can't find all the documents online anywhere. So what we do then is send a Public Records Act request. That's the name in California. Nationally, they're known as FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests, to the local government asking for the information. That's how I get a lot of my information, by doing Public Records Act or FOIA requests. Now, this job is getting easier. So previously, before 2013, a lot of governments would just not file their financial reports on the MSRB EMMA system. And then starting last year, the SEC started fining the investment banks that issued the municipal bonds on behalf of cities that failed to file their annual financial disclosures. So because of that SEC enforcement action, the population of EMMA has greatly increased, as you can see from the bar chart there. It's a little bit deceptive because in 2014, a lot of cities were back filing. So if they didn't put up their 2010, 2011, 2012, they had to put that up all in 2014 in order to become compliant and avoid SEC enforcement action. Then some states are compiling all of the financial statements and putting them up. So a great example of that is Illinois. You can see the lower JPEG there. There's a warehouse that the state controller has set up where they post all of these documents. California, not so much. California, you can actually send the state controller a Public Records Act request, and that's the way you can obtain the financial statements in California. And I should mention that California Common Sense, which is a not-for-profit organization that arose out of Stanford University, they've actually put up a CAFR repository on, they've put up an audited financial statement repository. CAFR is a word of art in the community. It stands for Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. They put up a repository of those. They've got about 40,000 documents there. If you look me up on the Sunlight Foundation, you'll see that in April I did a profile of that initiative. That still has a lot of gaps and it's not being kept current as far as I can tell. So getting the documents is still hard, but it's getting easier. But the bigger challenge, and one that might be, might resonate with more of you in the room who are dealing with non-financial data sets, is the fact that the data is locked in PDFs. So that's really introduces a huge problem because PDFs really were designed for viewing. They weren't really designed for data analysis. So you find that PDFs basically have two flavors. There are PDFs that were created through photography or scanning, and so there's no embedded text within the document. And then there are PDFs that were generated by printing from an application. So you have an Excel spreadsheet and you print to a PDF. In that case, the PDF has the text embedded in it and it's much easier to work with. So if you have a file like that, you can take an open source tool like Tabula, which is available on GitHub, and you can download it, written in Java and Ruby, and it'll do an analysis of the tables in that file, and will allow you to extract them. I also have worked with a lot of non-open source solutions. I find one that's particularly good is called Able to Extract from a company called Invest in Tech in Toronto, Canada. That one's very good. It only costs like about $100. Very easy to work with. So that's the printed PDFs. Now, what about the scanned PDFs? So they're a lot harder because you've got to do optical character recognition on those. So one great tool for optical character recognition is ABBY Fine Reader, but that again is that's not an open source, non-free kind of tool. It costs between $100 and $400, depending on what flavor you get. Or you can use Tesseract, which is a very well-known open source framework for working with scan documents and other images. So then you have to basically get the document to be at the point where it can then be looked at by a table reader. So it's like a two-step process. Okay, so in my case, we've now collected about 20,000 of these documents, and we actually use an organization in Sri Lanka that works with a proprietary high-end version of ABBY because we just find that that's the most reliable solution. So one argument I get into with a lot of people in the open data, open source community is, should you always use open source for everything? Or is there something, is there some use case for using proprietary commercial software? My basic view is, if you're an open society advocate and you're trying to provide more transparency, that's your goal, and you should be doing things in the most cost-effective way possible. So for me, I've made the decision that I'm okay with using closed source stuff. I can understand why other people would come with the other point of view. I've done a lot of advocacy around getting away from the PDF format so that more people can analyze these documents without having to master a lot of technology. And I was very pleased to learn that in March of 2015, a congressman from Southern California named Darrell Issa has actually put up a bill in the House of Representatives that would require several different classes of financial related filings to be in a format called Extensible Business Reporting Language, or XBRL, which is a type of XML. So that would mean that you would no longer have to use a PDF parser. Anyone who can work with XML or can use a piece of XML parsing software would have much easier access to this to this data. And currently, that bill, which is called HR 2477, please call your representative, has 28 co-sponsors. So hopefully next year that'll be something that Congress passes, and there'll be a way out of this PDF conundrum that we're currently in. So for me, again, focusing back on the financial statistics, once I have collected the documents and extracted the revenue, expenditure, and debt data out of there, I want to do some kind of model on that. And essentially, it's not that fancy. It's actually sort of very traditional pre-data science statistical analysis. What you're really doing in a situation like this is you want to get a large number of entities that have not had a credit event, in other words, have not gone bankrupt or have had a municipal bond default, and a large number that have had. And as I said a little earlier, we have not had a large number until very recently, so we had to go back to the Depression to do this. So I compared entities that in the Depression defaulted versus entities that didn't default during the Depression, and I found that the ratio of interest to revenue was a very strong predictor of whether you would have a default. And so I fitted a model based on that, and also based on casual observations from, or I should say case study observations from more recent defaults, where I found that the general fund balance, that's basically the balance in the government's checking account, turns out to be a very good predictor. So if you divide that by general fund expenditures, you find that that ratio tends to be associated with a government financial crisis. If that goes very low or negative, then you're going to have a problem. So in terms of presenting the data, I'm working on a project right now which is open source called GovWiki, and we're using a lot of the available visualization tools from Google to show these kinds of documents, or to show these kinds of results. So if you look at the left slide, this is a map of Puerto Rico. Red means in financial distress, green means not in financial distress, yellow means somewhere in between. And so we're able to sort of visualize how Puerto Rico looks. And we're doing the same thing in California. The California side is much more ambitious. It has a lot of non-financial data in it. And let me just hit a couple of those points. So we've talked about the census data already, getting the list of governments. I was able to get that by asking the census. I didn't actually have to do a FOIA request. Then we also look at council and school board minutes. Well, a lot of those are posted on the government's website, so it's a matter of finding them, downloading them, and often running them through OCR, because usually or very often they're scanned documents. Local campaign finance, which council people or which school board members are getting more contributions, and what special interests are giving them those contributions. So it turns out that in a lot of cases, this data is only kept on site at the city. It's not posted anywhere. It may be held at the county also, because the counties in California operate a registrar of voters that handles a lot of the campaign finance work for special districts and school districts. So you actually have to go there, and then you can go with your iPhone, take photographs of the materials, bring it back home, run it through OCR software, or just rekey it, and you have a campaign finance database for your city or school district. Crime statistics, that's pretty easy. They're on the FBI's website. Pretty easy to parse the HTML and bring it into another application. I got a lot of school-related data from the California Department of Education. I think you'll find that in other states as well, state departments of education. Also, the Federal Department of Education posts a lot of school district performance data, things like that. So kinds of information you get there are academic performance index, how good are particular schools, what's the average for a school district, percentage of students on free or reduced price lunch, so you get a sense of what the poverty level in those districts are. And I was pretty shocked. I mean, you have a lot of districts where it's over 90% of students are on free or reduced price lunch. And that's even true in cities that are not that poor. So I think it shows you that in a lot of cases, all the more affluent students are being sucked out into the private schools, and the public schools are really, getting a really heavy burden of impoverished students. And then we also looked at library hours, and those came from the state library. Talked about developing the scoring model. Here's what the model looks like. Several other organizations like the California League of Cities, the state of Michigan, the state of New York, they've developed models like this as well, often more complicated. So I just wanted to show you that once you run these models, you can actually use them to create news. So what I did last year was I analyzed every single city in California using my model. And I found that Compton had the worst financial statistics based on my model of any city, and it got into the Los Angeles Times. I don't think the mayor of Compton, I know the city manager of Compton weren't too happy because the city manager called me and said, you must be wrong. But that's the great thing about doing data science as opposed to subjectively rating things like rating agencies do. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inputs, and then there's an output. And you have to defend how the inputs were weighted and why they were selected, but if there's an empirical basis for that, it becomes a lot harder to say, well, this is a biased system, or that person from the rating agency didn't like me. It's a very objective way of looking at cities. And then finally, you can use this to find other, cases of things lying under the surface that you're not so aware of. So I found the city of Glendale, Arizona, which is a suburb of Phoenix, has very bad financial statistics. And it turned out that the problem there was they've overinvested in a hockey rink for an NHL team. And the NHL team basically, I think, went bankrupt, and they ended up having to take over all the financing of the hockey rink. So cautionary note to the mayor of Oakland, who's right now talking about building a new stadium for the Raiders. I just say don't. Just don't do it. It's real. You really get in trouble with these sports kinds of things. Time for a couple of questions. Anyone have anything? Yeah, I'm back.
What's your software that's
Abby, all Abby. That's they have a really full line of tools, and you can also, they also have a web-based delivery, so you can actually get an API key and upload to Abby, so I very strongly recommend them as a proprietary vendor. Yeah?
What's the time frequency for most of this data?
What's the?
Time frequency, how often do they?
Audited financial statements are annual, budgets are annual. Some cities will put out quarterly or monthly progress reports. So it's definitely a huge step behind where companies are, because all companies issue financial updates quarterly. One advantage of getting these statements and compiling them and putting them out on the web and making them more publicly available is to put pressure on cities to improve their transparency. Another related problem is the delay between the end of the fiscal year and when the statements come out. So Compton, for example, was 2 years late in publishing their financial audits. That itself is an indication that the city has a problem. Typically, a city will run 3 to 9 months, with more between 6 and 9 months than 3 to 6 months. So again, compared to a company, which will be 3 weeks, it's a big difference. Anyway, I think I saw another hand. So talk to me after, okay? Yeah.
I'm not from the US, so I may be wrong, but I believe there is an executive order from Obama in 2013 asking all administration to use machine-readable format. This is also very great, actually, as people start doing it. So this also may be a solution to the PDF problem.
That is related to another congressional act that was passed in 2013 called the Data Act. So that required all federal spending to be available in machine-readable format. So, we have the federal government, we have state governments, and we have local governments. So we need these mandates now to come down to the lower levels of government. And then, I don't know, a lot of countries, countries are all over the map as far as this is concerned, right? Eurostat is a great source of fiscal information for countries in Europe, but local governments in Europe, it's usually really hard to get their information in a kind of standardized way. Yes?
Have you ever run into a situation where the data was showing maybe the city had cooked their numbers, falsified information, and you did?
I haven't been at this long enough, and I haven't had enough data to be able to detect that. But I will say one thing, which is that you find in a number of financial statements that there will be what are called prior period adjustments. So Stockton had a very large prior period adjustment in the year before it filed for bankruptcy. So the simple appearance of those could be an indicator of that. And should I unpack the word prior period adjustment, maybe just real quick? That means that the financial accounting numbers that were presented at the previous year were wrong, and they had to be restated. In Stockton's case, it was a $100 million restatement, which for a city that size was huge. Anyone else? Well, great. Thank you very much for listening.